What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. It's December 5th, 2024. Championship week is here. The college football playoff field is about to be solidified, and we have a ton of great matchups coming up this weekend. We're going to be breaking down all the conference championship games and the implications of each of them, but before we do, as usual, I wanted to give some rankings reaction to the latest top 25 that the College Football Playoff Committee released on Tuesday night. This top 25 is the second to last that the committee will produce this season, with the last one being on Selection Sunday, this Sunday, just a couple days from now, where they will officially decide the inaugural 12-team college football playoff bracket. If you follow the pages on Twitter and Instagram, you may have seen some of my reaction to these rankings. I was pretty outspoken over there, but first off, there isn't a team in college football that receives more special treatment than Alabama. Nick Saban's not there anymore, and when the committee and AP voters or whoever was giving Alabama the benefit of the doubt when they had the greatest coach in our sports history, that was somewhat understandable. He's gone now, though, and the coddling and the special treatment needs to stop. Alabama getting destroyed by 6-6 Oklahoma and beaten by 6-6 Vanderbilt is no big deal if you have the Script A logo, but Miami coming up short on the road by 4 points against 9-3 Syracuse is somehow a deal breaker for the committee. The committee obviously thinks that Syracuse is pretty solid. They rank them lower than they should have, but we'll talk about that in a second. But they did put them in the top 25 and acknowledge that they're 9-3, they have 2 ranked wins, and they have the country's leading passer in Kyle McCord. So Miami dropped 6 spots for losing by 4 points on the road to 9-3 Syracuse, who is now ranked. 2 weeks ago, Alabama dropped 6 spots for losing by 21 on the road to 6-6 Oklahoma. Miami dropped from 6 to 12 for losing by 4 points on the road to a 9-3 team that's now ranked, and that was Miami's second loss of the season. They dropped 6 spots. Alabama gets destroyed by 21 by a team whose offense is ranked 94th in the FBS right now, and that was the Tide's third loss of the season, and they drop an equal number of spots to what Miami did. That's insane. Then you can also bring Ohio State into this conversation. They lost to 6-5 Michigan as a 20-point favorite at home, and that was Ohio State's second loss of the season. They dropped 4 spots. Miami lost to 9-3 Syracuse on the road, also for their second loss of the season, and dropped 6 spots. How does that make any sense? And going back to Alabama, the special treatment that they're receiving isn't just for them over teams outside the SEC like Miami, it's also for them over Ole Miss. And a lot of people were upset about South Carolina's ranking at number 14 as well, but they lost to Alabama head-to-head, so there's not really a great case for them there. But how Ole Miss is 2 spots behind Alabama is insane. To be clear, I think Miami should be ahead of both of them, but how they separated Ole Miss and Alabama and put Miami in between them makes absolutely zero sense. I mean, Alabama and Ole Miss are like almost the exact same resume. Both beat Georgia, except Ole Miss beat Georgia by more than Alabama did. Both beat South Carolina, except Ole Miss beat South Carolina by more than Alabama did. Alabama lost to Oklahoma. Ole Miss beat Oklahoma by 12. Then there's also the counter argument where Alabama beat LSU and Ole Miss lost to LSU, but basically other than that, every other common opponent is an Ole Miss advantage. The Rebels have the loss to 4-8 Kentucky, but that's pretty much the same thing as getting blown out by a 6-win team. I mean, losing by 3 to 4-8 Kentucky or losing by 21 to 6-6 Oklahoma, one could argue that the Oklahoma loss is even worse. So not only is Alabama getting preferential treatment over teams like Miami, they're also getting it within their own conference over teams who you could argue are more deserving. How they came up with enough of a difference between those 2 resumes to put Miami in between them and put Alabama ahead by 2 spots makes absolutely no sense other than they simply want Alabama in the field. When I brought up Missouri like 4 or 5 weeks ago, I think even before the CFP Top 25 was coming out, the AP voters were doing it as well, but I brought up Missouri and pointed out their undeserving ranking in numerous weeks. That wasn't for no reason. That was because this isn't my first rodeo with the CFP committee. I've watched what they've done over the past decade now, and while a couple people on the committee change from year to year, the overall group is still the same as it was last year and even 2 years ago to some extent, and the criteria that they follow is pretty much the same each season. Sometimes they differ from that criteria though, and kind of just when they pick and choose, and Missouri staying at the exact same ranking after losing to South Carolina was a dead giveaway of what they were doing. They ranked Missouri number 23. Missouri went on the road, lost to South Carolina. The next Tuesday night, Missouri was still ranked number 23. There was a clear intention to keep Missouri ranked at any and all costs to give Alabama the ranked win that they desperately needed for this exact scenario to have a talking point in comparison to a team like Miami. And while they were doing everything they could to try to keep Missouri ranked, like not moving them a single spot after losing, at the same time they were completely barring Duke from ever being in the conversation to get ranked. Duke is 9-3, they lost to number 12 Miami on the road, they took number 8 SMU to overtime, and they lost to Georgia Tech on the road, who just took Georgia to 8 overtimes after going into the fourth quarter with the lead in that game. There are 2 Power 4 teams that have stayed within one possession of SMU the entire year. Those are 10-2 BYU, who beat them, and 9-3 Duke. This is the first time since 2015 that a 9-3 Power 4 team has been left unranked at the end of the regular season. 8 consecutive years where every single 9-3 Power 4 team finished ranked, but Duke is conveniently left out of the top 25, so Miami and SMU can't have that ranked win. And to take it a step further, the Blue Devils are one of just 2 9-3 Power 4 teams in the last 20 years to finish the regular season unranked. Never once ranked in the AP poll, never once ranked in the CFP top 25, never even mentioned on the rankings show as a possibility. But we have teams like Missouri, who's been beaten by 30 points twice, Illinois, who got taken to overtime by 1-11 Purdue at home. Purdue is quite literally one of the worst Power 4 teams of all time. We have teams like Memphis ranked, who lost to UTSA, who's 6-6. We can't have the Blue Devils ranked, though, because that would give both Miami and SMU a ranked win. And the reason that I know that's the case is because that was the main talking point that the CFP chairman, Ward Manuel, made in the interview on the rankings show. He immediately cited Alabama's record against ranked opponents and Miami's record against ranked opponents, when he's one of the people who made the rankings. So they purposely put in teams like Missouri to help Alabama and Illinois as a filler team to leave teams like Duke and Louisville out with seemingly zero explanation, and then it's just like, well, we were forced to put Alabama ahead of Miami at 11 and 12 because we intentionally boosted the Tide's resume and barred the Canes from having any ranked wins. Keeping it in that same area, how are Missouri, UNLV, and Illinois ranked over Syracuse? It doesn't really matter at this point, but that doesn't change the fact that it makes zero sense. Syracuse is 9-3 and has wins over number 20 UNLV on the road and number 12 Miami. So first off, how are they not ranked over UNLV with the direct head-to-head over the Rebels in Las Vegas? And one thing that the ACC's commissioner brought up the other day that I thought was a really good point was that they ranked 9-3 Alabama ahead of 10-2 Miami because Alabama has more ranked wins, but not 9-3 Syracuse ahead of 10-2 UNLV when Syracuse has 2 more ranked wins and beat UNLV on the road. So that's either a massive oversight, or they just have no idea that Syracuse beat UNLV, or they just pick and choose what matters when it helps benefit them. And keeping it on that same track with the other 3 teams, not just UNLV, but Missouri and Illinois as well, Syracuse has more ranked wins than the other 3 teams do combined, and they're ranked behind them for some unknown reason. And finally, on Monday on Instagram, I made a blind resume post for a 10-2 team. 84% of the now over 31,000 people who voted on it said they'd have this team ranked in the top 12. And I turned the comments off on the post so the team wouldn't get spoiled and it could just stay anonymous and people could guess simply based on the blind resume. So I got a bunch of DMs for people trying to guess who it was. The top 2 most common guesses that I got were Tennessee and Ohio State. That resume was BYU's, and the Cougars are getting shoved down to number 18 for seemingly no reason. They're 10-2, they have a top 10 win on the road over number 8 SMU, and the committee literally just treats them like an afterthought. And people can try to say, oh, they lost to 5-7 Kansas. Alabama lost to 6-6 Oklahoma by 21, and 6-6 Vanderbilt. Ole Miss lost to 4-8 Kentucky. You can go team by team and make that. Ohio State, they lost to 6-5 Michigan. You can go team by team and say that for anybody. But for BYU, they just get shoved down to number 18, and why they weren't even remotely in consideration for that at-large bid spot is really strange. That's about all that I had for rankings reaction. We'll have just one more of these next week for the final college football playoff top 25 of the season. That'll come out on Sunday, and we'll have the CFP field set and a lot to talk about then. Let me know what your thoughts are on the top 25 and on my analysis of it, and anything on your mind about the rankings and the college football playoff picture in general. Comment them down below. All right, let's get into some conference championship game previews. With the avenue that the playoff committee chose on Tuesday night, we're going to go a different route than I initially planned on in terms of the order of these, because this game now probably has the most significant implications of changing who will get into the playoff and who will be left out. Number 17 Clemson will take on number 8 SMU in the ACC championship game in Charlotte, North Carolina. SMU is a 2.5 point favorite. The over-under is 55.5. Implied score of 29-27 Mustangs. Clemson got into the ACC championship game at the final hour after Syracuse knocked off Miami. It quite literally came down to the last possible result to decide that spot, but SMU has been dominant in conference play all season. They're 8-0 in ACC play and one of two Power 4 teams to go unbeaten in their conference. The other is number 1 Oregon. One thing I wanted to point your attention to in this one is some common opponents that SMU and Clemson have, because the Mustangs have outdone Clemson in just about every game. Clemson beat Florida State by 16, SMU beat Florida State by 26, Clemson lost to Louisville by 12, SMU beat Louisville by 7, Clemson beat Stanford by 26, SMU beat Stanford by 30, Clemson beat Pitt by 4, SMU beat Pitt by 23, and Clemson beat Virginia by 17, SMU beat Virginia by 26. It is quite literally every single common opponent. SMU performed better than Clemson did. The Stanford game is comparable, margins of 26 and 30, and then Clemson pulled their starters early against Virginia after leading by 28. So you could say those were about the same, but really every single game is an SMU advantage. Then in terms of overall team stats, Clemson's offense is 14th, SMU's offense is 5th, Clemson's defense is 34th, SMU's defense is 19th. While SMU leads on offense and defense, I believe the key to the game lies in a different statistical category. One area where Clemson has a massive edge over SMU, and really the majority of the country, is in turnover margin. The Tigers are 5th in the FBS in turnover margin, and the Mustangs are 57th. Clemson's forced 23 turnovers and only given it up 9 times. SMU's forced 21 turnovers and given it up 19 times. I think this will be the key to the game. If the Tigers can continue attacking the ball on defense and protecting it on offense, if guys like TJ Parker, Peter Woods, Barrett Carter, and Sammy Brown can get to Kevin Jennings and maybe force a strip fumble or something, I think that can win them the game. And then in the secondary as well, if guys like Khalil Barnes, Avion Terrell, Ashton Hampton can make an interception or two like they have in, I believe, 4 consecutive games, if they can take a couple drives from that explosive SMU offense, I think the Tigers will have a good shot to win it. On the other hand, if Kevin Jennings and Brashard Smith are careful with the ball, if they maybe turn it over one time but not multiple and keep Clemson from any easy field position, then SMU will have a great shot. In addition to SMU having to be careful with the ball to win this game, they're going to have to play clean and not penalize themselves as well. There are 134 teams in the FBS. SMU is 130th in penalty yards this season. They've been penalized 101 times for a total of 962 yards. Clemson is 35th in penalties, 64 penalties for 602 yards. There's almost 100 spots separating them in this category. And there's probably going to be a good amount of Tigers fans there in Charlotte, so SMU is going to have to avoid false starts. They're going to have to avoid holding those aggressive defensive ends, stuff like that if they're going to win this game. One other major advantage that Clemson holds is Dabo Swinney. The Tigers have been to the ACC championship game 8 times since 2011. They are 8-0 in those games. And in those 8 games, not only have they won all of them, they have an average margin of victory of 26 points. If there's one thing Dabo knows how to do, it's win in the ACC title game. They beat number 5 Virginia Tech by 28 in 2011. They beat number 10 North Carolina by 8 in 2015. They beat number 23 Virginia Tech by 7 in 2016. They beat number 7 Miami by 35 in 2017. They beat Pitt by 32 in 2018. They beat Virginia by 45 in 2019. They beat number 2 Notre Dame by 24 in 2020. And they beat number 23 North Carolina by 29 in 2022. The margins of victory in their last 5 trips have been 35, 32, 45, 24, and 29. Every time they've been there, Dabo's had them playing at a different level. And if Clemson wins, I don't think it'll be by a margin like that, but it'll be interesting to see if their trend of winning there continues, or if the newcomer SMU can hold them off and get the title in their first season in the conference. Interestingly enough, this isn't the first time that a team has come into the ACC, won every conference game in their first year as a member, and faced Clemson in the ACC championship game. Number 2 Notre Dame did this exact same thing in 2020 when they temporarily joined the conference during COVID, and Clemson beat them by 24 in that ACC title game. Prediction-wise, it's going to be a common thread in these championship games. I think all 6 of the ones with playoff implications have spreads under 5 points, but I can really see this battle between SMU and Clemson going either way. I will take Clemson to pull off the slight upset, though. I think this team is pretty similar to their 2022 squad, who also lost to South Carolina at home and then went on to win the ACC championship game 39-10 the next week. I don't think it'll be by a lot like that. I think it'll probably be a one-score game, but they were my preseason ACC championship pick, and I do think Dabo Swinney, Cade Klubnik, TJ Parker, and the Clemson Tigers will be the 2024 ACC champions and punch their ticket to the college football playoff. Should that actually happen, in absolutely no world should SMU fall out of the college football playoff field. If SMU loses, they should still be in. If 9-3 Alabama jumps 11-2 SMU because the Mustangs lost in the conference championship game to the number 17 team, that would be a complete and total disaster for college football. The Mustangs are in. Heading out to Arlington, Texas, another matchup with major implications as the winner is guaranteed an auto bid and the loser will be left out. Number 16 Iowa State is taking on number 15 Arizona State on Saturday at noon on ABC. Arizona State is a 2-point favorite. The over-under is 50.5, implied score of 26-24 Sun Devils. You're going to see a lot of projected outcomes that look just like that. I was going through the games, and there's like 4 or 5 that have almost the exact same spread and same over-under. Vegas has basically every conference championship matchup extremely tight with very similar spreads and point totals. A few weeks back, I made a big deal about a statement made on College Game Day. I think it was 3 weeks ago when they were making picks right before the game started. They were about to pick the Kansas State-Arizona State game. And Desmond Howard pointed to the game and said this.
Big 12, Arizona State, Kansas State still in the mix. They need a little help to get to the Big 12 title game.
I saw that on the rundown. I was like, why are we picking this game? I thought it was a mistake.
That might be the first one of those this season.
Yeah, but just Kansas State, I guess. Let's go Kansas State.
I took to Instagram and Twitter and pointed out how ridiculous that statement was, and even then, when it wasn't super mainstream, it didn't look super likely, I pointed out how feasible of a path Arizona State had to the Big 12 championship game and the college football playoff. Well, here we are now, December 6th. The Sun Devils are in the Big 12 championship tomorrow, one win away from punching their ticket to the CFP with an auto bid, and they are favored to do so. The key to this game, just like every other Arizona State game, is if the Cyclones can somewhat contain running back Cam Skattebo. He, of course, is one of the best in all of college football in terms of total yards per game. He's second in the FBS behind only the should-be Heisman winner, Ashton Jeanty. Skattebo averages 170 total yards every time he steps on the field. And then on the flip side, Iowa State's rushing defense is 96th in the FBS. They give up an average of 173 rushing yards per game. Not great, so they're going to need to scheme up some things that'll intentionally limit the yardage that Skattebo picks up, both on the ground, but also the touches that he gets through the air as well. Just like the Clemson and SMU disparity in penalties, this matchup is very similar. Iowa State is 4th in the FBS in fewest penalties per game. They are the 4th lowest penalized team in the country. Very, very clean games. Arizona State, however, is 86th in the FBS in penalties per game. The Cyclones have had 49 penalties called on them this year. Arizona State has had 77. So if Skattebo is able to rack up some yards, the Sun Devils are going to have to avoid taking those yards away from themselves through penalties like they have throughout the year. Prediction on this one, I've been high on Arizona State for a while now. Like I mentioned at the beginning, when they were unranked, when they were 6th or 7th in Big 12 standings, I noticed the team that they had, I noticed the path that they had. I talked about it on the show, I made a few social media posts about it, and slowly but surely it became a reality, and now it's here. And while I think what Matt Campbell and the Cyclones have done this year is phenomenal, getting that first 10-win season in Iowa State program history, I'm going to keep rolling with the Sun Devils. I think Arizona State gets the job done on Saturday and punches their ticket to the college football playoff. Moving up north to Indianapolis, number 3 Penn State is taking on number 1 Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Oregon is a 3.5-point favorite. The over-under is 49.5. Implied score of 27-23 Ducks. Ohio State lost their spot in the shocking loss to Michigan last week, and with an emphatic 44-7 stomping of Maryland on Saturday, Penn State are in that spot to play in the Big Ten title game against number 1 Oregon. Every single Power 4 conference championship game has a team who is in their first season in the conference, and in the Big Ten's case, that is Oregon. I touched on it with SMU earlier, but there are 2 teams who went undefeated in conference play in a Power 4 league this year, and those are Oregon and SMU. Also, just like SMU, Oregon was in the conference championship game for their former conference last season, the Pac-12, where they fell just short. to the eventual national runner-up, Washington. The Ducks have been the only team all season who didn't have a massive letdown game. They didn't have a loss. They are the only unbeaten team standing, and they look to hold on to that number 1 overall seed in the playoff. For Penn State, this is their first appearance in the Big Ten title game since 2016 when they had a thrilling comeback victory over Wisconsin. They overcame a 28-7 deficit in that game to win 38-31. Probably should have been in the college football playoff in 2016, but when I first realized that, I was pretty shocked. 8 seasons since Penn State had been to the conference title, but they won the last one and have a pretty good shot of getting this one as well. The biggest key to this game will be who can get the better pass rush, specifically for Penn State, if they can disrupt Dylan Gabriel and the rhythm that he's been in all year. Both teams are in the top 13 in fewest sacks allowed. Penn State has allowed 11 sacks, and Oregon has allowed 12 sacks. That is all season. That's literally one a game, and less than one a game in Penn State's case. So I think whoever has more success getting into the backfield, causing an off-target pass that gets picked off, setting up a third and long with a timely sack or tackle for loss, they'll have the edge in this matchup. Prediction-wise, I've been going back and forth on this one for a while, but I'm going to roll with the Ducks to pull off the win, improve to 13-0, and claim that number 1 seed in the inaugural 12-team college football playoff field. The main reason that I'm going with Oregon is Penn State's overall lack of tests throughout the season. And in the 2 games against ranked opponents that they've played, they were both at home, for one. They lost one of them, and they were in a 7-point game with Illinois before pulling away on a late touchdown to make it a 14-point margin with, I think, under 2 minutes left. They haven't had a significant test away from home, other than maybe 7-5 Minnesota, who they beat by 1 point in Minneapolis, and on the road at USC, where they got taken to overtime. If you follow the CFB Kings social media pages, you might know my opinion of Illinois. It has nothing to do with the school or anything, just the team this year I think is pretty overrated. That Illinois team lost to Oregon by 30, and they got taken to overtime by 1-11 Purdue, who I mentioned earlier is quite literally one of the worst Power 4 teams of all time in certain stats. But that Illinois team is Penn State's best win. Oregon beat Ashton Genty and Boise State, although they didn't really contain Genty at all in that game, but they did beat the number 10 Broncos. They beat Ohio State. They beat Illinois by 29, by basically double the margin that Penn State did, and I think the Ducks get the better of the Nittany Lions. I'll take Oregon to win the 2024 Big Ten title. In Atlanta, Georgia, the number 5 Georgia Bulldogs are taking on the number 2 Texas Longhorns in the SEC championship game. Texas is a 2.5-point favorite. Over-under is 49.5, implied score of 26-24 Longhorns. This is the only Power 4 conference title game that features a rematch from the regular season. There are a couple that do in the group of 5, which we'll get to in a minute, but in that regular season matchup, Georgia beat Texas 30-15 on the road in Austin. That, of course, was the game in which the questionable pass interference was overturned after Texas fans threw garbage on the field and all that. But that game was pretty much controlled entirely by the Dogs. I think they led 20-0 at one point. But that game is Texas's only loss, and they seek to avenge that on Saturday afternoon. Georgia's coming off the 8-overtime thriller with Georgia Tech last week. They're 10-2 with the losses to Ole Miss and Alabama. The Dogs do get the home field advantage this time with the game being in Atlanta, so they're practically doing a home and home in the same season, but there will certainly be a lot of Longhorns fans making the trip. The biggest key to this matchup will simply be which quarterback makes the bigger plays. Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers have both been phenomenal at points this year, and they've both had some really uninspiring games as well. If the Dogs are going to get it done, Carson Beck needs to be really sharp. Fortunately for them, he has been lately. Unfortunately for them, the last time he faced Texas, he had 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. That game was part of the stretch in the middle of the year where he had 2 touchdowns and 9 turnovers in a 3-game span. But over the last 3 weeks, he has 941 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 0 picks. Granted, that span includes playing UMass and having the overtimes against Georgia Tech, where I think he had 2 touchdowns, but he was turning it over left and right before, and he's really gotten that under control now. Quinn Ewers had a similar string of turnovers earlier in the season like Beck. Not quite as bad, but he did have 5 interceptions in 4 games at one point, and he had just 1 pick in the entire month of November. Interestingly enough, yet pretty understandably with the defenses that these teams field, Carson Beck's lowest QBR of the season was against Texas, and Quinn Ewers' lowest QBR of the season was against Georgia. So whichever QB can put together a few drives, hit a couple deep balls, and not give it away, they'll have their team in position to win this one. Prediction-wise, I think it's hard to beat a team twice. Georgia got the best of Texas in October, but I think this game will look a little bit different. There were 7 turnovers in the first matchup between these two. I think we'll have a cleaner game in Atlanta on Saturday, and even though Texas lost the first game by 15, they had more first downs than Georgia did and just 24 less total yards. I'll take the Longhorns to avenge their loss earlier in the year. They were my preseason pick to win the conference, and I think Texas will win the SEC championship as their first year as a member. In a pivotal one in the Mountain West, number 10 Boise State takes on number 20 UNLV, another rematch for the Mountain West championship and an auto bid to the playoff. Boise State is a 4-point favorite. The over-under is 57.5. Implied score of 31-27 Broncos. Boise State won the regular season matchup 29-24. That was a phenomenal game in Las Vegas. The Mountain West title game will be in Boise, though, so like Georgia and Texas, they are pretty much literally doing a home and home. The Broncos led the first meeting 20-10 at the half, but UNLV battled back to take a 24-23 lead in the fourth quarter before a 1-yard touchdown by Ashton Jeanty ended up being the game winner. For the majority of that game, UNLV actually did a really good job containing Jeanty. It's one of the few games all year where I can vividly remember being like, this isn't a great game so far for Jeanty, and he still finished with 128 yards. That should be our Heisman Trophy winner, by the way. But he was held to 3.9 yards per carry against the Rebels. That's his lowest of any game this season. UNLV quarterback Haj Malik Williams was phenomenal in that game. He actually had more yards per carry than Jeanty did. Williams had 179 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, and then 19 carries for 105 yards and a rushing touchdown as well. They're going to need a similar performance out of him if they're going to be able to flip the script and win this one. The biggest key to the game, of course, is if UNLV will be able to replicate their defensive performance against Jeanty and keep him contained. But outside of that, the Rebels are going to need a big night out of wide receiver Ricky White III. White has 5 different games with over 100 receiving yards, and he has 3 different games with multiple receiving touchdowns, and he's equally as valuable on special teams, where he's blocked 4 punts this season. He recently won the award as the Mountain West Special Teams Player of the Year. If he can get over 100 yards receiving and potentially be involved on another blocked punt, that could be a sign of the Rebels heading toward a victory. A really intriguing stat about this game that might surprise a lot of people is that UNLV as a team actually averages more rushing yards per game than Boise State and Ashton Jeanty do. UNLV is 4th in rushing offense, averaging 254.1 rushing yards per game, and Boise State is 6th, averaging 253.5 rushing yards per game. So a difference of 0.6, but if you had to guess on that without knowing, I think basically every person in the country that doesn't know the stat would probably project that Boise State averages more rushing yards per game. As for my prediction, I'm a lot higher on the Rebels than I think most of the public is. They really easily could have won that first matchup with Boise, and they missed a field goal in that game. They threw an interception that was returned to their own 7-yard line that immediately resulted in a Boise State touchdown, and despite that, they still led in the fourth quarter. The only thing that really has me concerned is the weather in Boise for this one. They got the last one at home in Vegas in the Allegiant Stadium, but this one will be outside. It'll be very cold, and I think the Rebels will come out on top, though, and punch their ticket to the college football playoff. We also have a good one in the Sun Belt Championship between Marshall and Louisiana. The Ragin' Cajuns are 5.5-point favorites. The over-under is 56.5. Implied score of 31-26 Louisiana. The Sun Belt is the only conference that still has divisions, which is pretty cool. So this is the Sun Belt East champion Marshall against Sun Belt West champion Louisiana. If you haven't kept up with the Thundering Herd this year, they are 9-3, and they have a flair for the dramatic. They beat Western Michigan by 7, they beat UL Monroe by 5, they beat Old Dominion by 7, and just beat James Madison by 2 in double overtime in order to clinch their spot in this game. Their only loss in conference play was by a single point, 24-23, on the road to Georgia Southern. Louisiana's been really solid offensively all year long. They're top 15 in points per game, averaging 35.6 points, which poses some trouble for Marshall's 67th ranked defense. Prediction-wise, I'll take the Ragin' Cajuns over the Thundering Herd. I think Louisiana improves to 11-2, and I think they get their second Sun Belt championship in the last 4 years. Next, we have the MAC championship between the Ohio Bobcats and the Miami of Ohio Redhawks. Miami of Ohio is a 1.5-point favorite. The over-under is 44.5. Implied score of 23-22 Redhawks. The MAC championship gives us a rematch of the regular season game between these two that Miami won 30-20. and I think they get them again. I think Miami of Ohio beats Ohio, and I think the Red Hawks get back-to-back MAC championships. In the American, we have Tulane taking on number 24 Army. Tulane is a 5-point favorite. The over-under is 45.5. Implied score of 25-20 Green Wave. This game was looking like it might have had college football playoff implications for Tulane as potentially the 5th highest ranked conference champion, but they lost to Memphis last week by 10, fell out of the rankings. They fell from number 17 all the way out after losing to Memphis, but still a fun matchup here. No college football playoff implications, but still a very exciting game. These two teams have been the most dominant in the conference all year long. Both were undefeated up until that game last week, so even with the loss to Memphis, Tulane still got this spot, and I think they've had it clinched for 2 weeks now. As much as I love and support the troops, I will be taking Tulane to win this one. I think Army's had a phenomenal year. They're 10-1, and that only loss coming to Notre Dame, who's in the playoff now and who very well could win the whole thing. But that Army strength of schedule was just really not great for the entire season. I believe it is second to last in the FBS. So the one real test that they had, it wasn't even close with the Fighting Irish, and I think Tulane gets the best of them. And last but certainly not least, we have the Conference USA Championship between Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State. And while we're previewing this game last, it is actually the first to be played. They play tonight, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network. Funny thing about this game, they actually played last week. Western Kentucky beat Jacksonville State 19-17 on Saturday, November 30th. So they literally played last week and will have back-to-back games against each other. The Hilltoppers got that 19-17 victory last week on a 50-yard field goal with 3 seconds left in the game. And while the game was pretty tight on the scoreboard, it wasn't really super tight in terms of some team stats. Western Kentucky had 100 more total yards than Jacksonville State did. They had 10 more first downs, but Jacksonville State played them really close, and it was overall a very exciting game. Despite Western Kentucky's win last week, Jacksonville State is a 4.5-point favorite. Over-under is 58, implied score of 31-27 Gamecocks. Last week was at Western Kentucky. This week is at Jacksonville State, so they do get that home field advantage, and that's pretty much the difference in the spread. They were a half-point favorite last week, lost on a walk-off field goal. They now get home field advantage, and that spread's been bumped up to 4.5. So we can expect a pretty similar game here is what Vegas is saying. Prediction-wise, I'm going to be disregarding the point spread. I'll be taking Western Kentucky to beat Jacksonville State for the second time in 2 weeks. The reason being, I just have more faith in their quarterback, Caden Veldkamp, who was 28 of 47 for 301 yards and a touchdown last week. And Jacksonville State's had some quarterback issues. Logan Smothers was just 4 of 6 for 62 yards. He's not their starter, but their starter wasn't playing. So, they have a massive advantage, Western Kentucky does, in the quarterback department right now. And I think the Hilltoppers get the win. That's going to wrap up this episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I felt like this one went a little longer than usual, but definitely wanted to preview every conference championship game this week, and really appreciate you making it to this point. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, and follow the podcast if you're listening on Spotify, and definitely go check out at CFBKings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.